guys, this is Shay Jose, and today I'll be giving you a breakdown of my track Calling, which is actually produced possibly close to about 6 months ago, and it's been recently released on the Siona Records compilation, for birthday compilation actually, recently. So I thought I'd just give you a breakdown of the track, how I put it together, and like always, the samples will be available for my Patreons to download. So if you like this, join my Patreon program. You can download these samples and use them in your own productions, royalty free. So let's get started. So the basis of any track, like I always do, is actually it's around the kick. So what I did is I've explained this before. I tend to use the same sort of kicks pretty much all the time, and just kind of recycle them and maybe just add a couple of layers here and there. In this particular case, I've got my standard kick that I usually use, and I've actually added this lower kick here, which is just EQ'd slightly differently. The reason for this was actually just to give the overall sound of the kick a little bit more body, as if I just felt it was a little bit weak with the rest of the track. So what I've done is in here, I've just basically routed the two kicks into a bus. I've gone into this a mountain of times in some of the tutorials. So if you haven't checked out how I actually process my kicks, just look through my YouTube videos and you'll find this is an actual tutorial there of how I put my kicks together and how I process them. So running this through some saturation, some EQ, and a little bit of Neutron 4. Then after that, we've got the sub, which is really just a serum running in there with the sub oscillator. There's not much going on with there. Adding this into mono, obviously, with some saturation, some EQ, and a little bit of side chaining compression. What I've done is in here, I think I've covered this before, but I've also added a clipper in here to basically tame some of the peaks. In your low end, obviously, there is not a lot of room for many sounds to compete. So what you want to do is actually be very careful about the sounds that you're using in that low area, and making sure that because the waveforms take a lot longer to actually peak and trough, you really need to make sure that that sound is kind of all nicely squashed in there to make it sound really nice and round. So by using a clipper, it allows me to actually shape the sound a little bit better, to make it fit in that low end. Obviously, we're doing a little bit of EQ, cutting away some of the unwanted noise around 50 Hertz, which is roughly around where the kick was hitting. And then slamming this into an L2. This is basically just to kind of really squash that sub in there. So as you can see from here, it's very, very stable in there, which is what we want, especially with that kind of syncopated sort of sub. We could probably drive this a little bit. I could drive this a little bit more actually. Now in hindsight, I could probably have driven it a little bit more, maybe get a 1 decibel of gain reduction just to squash it a little bit more. But I just felt it sounded kind of okay how I had it. We also got some parallel processing coming into this sub. I don't know if I've spoken about this before, but as you can see here, I've actually routed some channels. If you move across to the sub layer, I've actually routed some channels in here as well. So ENG. So if we go to ENG, we've got a compressor. So that's just doing some parallel compression there on the sub. And also another little bit of parallel compression, probably going a little bit too far on that. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Sorry, it should be H. And some hybrid compression in here. So we're doing in this sub, we're actually running some parallel compression. We're running this through a return channel here, slamming it quite hard and just blending some of that back into the sub. Moving on, we've got the mid bass, and we've got a couple of layers here, which I like to do, especially when I'm working with basses. So what I've got here is I've got a rolling bass patch, which is running throughout the track. Pretty simple, run on 16ths. We've got a square bass that runs over the top of that, processed a little bit differently and EQ'd a little bit differently. And that just kind of gives it the groove in the upper harmonies. And then we've got this other small layer that comes in and out as well, about 8 bars, 16 bars into the track. And I mean, individually they sound pretty dismal, but when you put them all together, they actually blend in quite nicely and gives the bass quite a lot of groove. So we're allowing the sub to take up a lot of the low end information, and then this kind of mid and top bass is actually EQ'd slightly differently. We're rolling off some of that, that 30 hertz range, doing a little bit of a bump around 755 and boosting a little bit around 196, which is around the mids. I just felt it needed a bit more bite. But playing them all together, they sound like this. One cool thing about actually separating your low end sub with your mid bass or any kind of top bass that you will use is you can actually make them a little bit more stereo. Like my sub is always in mono, while these guys are actually sitting a little bit more stereo, which actually allows a little bit more width and kind of keeps your low end really tight, but allowing your mid and your high end to actually sound a little bit more wider. So that's a little trick that I like to do. I don't really like to mix the bass all in the same patch, so I like to break up the sub and the bass, and it also allows me to make sure there's no phasing issues when I'm introducing. Moving on, we've got some percussions, pretty standard in there, just some loops that I've added and sliced up. Once again, we're adding this into a reverb, send and return, some delay, and some compression. Now, like I said, I tend to use a lot more send and returns because I can just route a lot of instruments to sound more coherent as they play through the track. So I've definitely done this with the percussion. Similar with the drums, I do have an audio effects rack which I've added here and some vocoder, only because this is actually running the hi-hats. I've got a lot of layers there of hats running into this one bus channel. With a vocoder that gives it a little bit more white noise, and the dry wet, if I just was to show you the automation here, I haven't done it much in this section, but as you can see here, I'm actually driving up the white noise in this automation here. So as it's playing through, it sounds pretty standard, but towards the end of the bar, you will hear the white noise actually swerve up. Which is a really cool effect that you can actually use to give a little bit more atmosphere and ear candy to your drums. So moving on, we've got some snares. I think I had... Yeah, we've pretty much got the one snare, but we've got a couple of different snare rolls and whatnot in there, all bus to this bus channel. We're just running a little bit of glue compression, some EQ in here, a little bit of saturation, and a little bit of glue compressor. Moving on, we'll probably just move on to some of the parts that are actually driving the track here, which is like this lead. So this lead here sounds something like this. And what you'll find is in a lot of my songs, I actually use a kind of call and response method when I'm actually doing my leads. This lead here will be available for download, and you will be able to get, I've used this in quite a lot of my productions, so you will find that the sounds kind of sound recycled because I am a pretty lazy producer. I like to recycle a lot of old projects and mix and match, and I guess that's how you make your own sound. So my productions tend to sound pretty similar, so you can actually really pick a Chez Jose song when you hear it. We're just adding some track spacer, some EQ, and we've got a delay chain here. We're adding a dry and a wet chain, so some delay, EQ in that delay, and then side chaining that delay to the dry signal, which you can do through here. I mean, if you want to know how to do this, just leave a comment below and I can go into this. And then we've got a separate reverb chain in there as well. And I'm actually clipping this at the end. The reason why you can clip this towards the end is to make sure that that tail, that reverb, it's all kind of coherent. There's no real peaks coming out that's actually going to make you, they are really going to stand out. So let's move on. So this is the response, I guess, lead that you could, that I'm referring to. This is just a simple serum patch. That's just playing throughout the song. Nothing too great in there. Really, the only other star of the show is, I guess, are Luke's vocals. Now, I haven't gone too much into how I produce vocals, but it's one of the things that I actually hate to do. I hate to produce vocals because every singer is different. Every vocal take is different. And 9 out of 10 times, if the vocal take is shit, the rest of the track, and it doesn't matter how much processing you do, is going to sound rubbish. So if you're working with a singer, make sure they're very competent, know what the hell they're doing, know how to take instructions, and make sure that you've got a good recording. Luke is very talented. Lucky for me, we have worked together on quite a few songs, so I definitely know his voice quite well. And something doesn't sound right, I will tell him, and he will actually tell me how he likes his voice to sound as well. So for this track, I actually went with a much more dry sort of approach for his track. We've got a lot of melodies in there, including a vocoder. That's kind of just tucked in there at the moment. I actually sang some harmonies on this as well, which I will not play to you, which actually sit very low in the mix. The reason being because Luke is actually singing falsetto in quite a few of these takes. My voice is a lot deeper, but just by adding that harmony underneath, it allowed it to actually sound a little bit more full. So I'll play you what the vocal bus sounds like, and then we can go through some of the processing. So.
In my head testify when you run away,
So it sounds really cool there. So what I've done is I've actually processed each and every one of these stems differently rather than actually send them all to a vocal bus. We just got some extra processing. So a lot of the grunt is actually being done at each channel individually. So usually what I do is for my vocals, I will actually grab the instrumental, put it in another project. At that point, I will then print them out to auto-tune or print it out to Melodyne, fix the pitch and all that sort of stuff, and then actually import those stems and send them across into the project and then process them individually. So what I like to do is actually treat the pitch correction separately before I actually start putting extra processing on there. It's just a good habit to get into. Then that way you kind of separate and commit your changes, and you've got a clean canvas to actually start working from. So most of these, while they have a lot of the same processing, they're all processed a little bit differently. We've got a little bit more compression on some leads. We've got a little bit more EQ rolled off the top and the bottom depending on which stem we're using. We've got a vocoder, for example, here that's actually following a MIDI guide that's from the chords of the song. Harmonies as well, processed a little bit differently, so adding a little bit more top end in there, taking some of the bottom. And then we've got the main lead, which is just adding some DSR. We're running this across with some EQ. And then we've got a little bit of RVox. Now I love this compressor, which is very transparent. You're just going to need to make sure that you don't go too hard on it. Otherwise, it's going to sound like they got a lisp. So you have to be kind of careful with this. Got some multiband compression running there. Some more DS in then to tame that. And then coming across through to some fresh air. Now, fresh air is great to add some top end, but be very careful of how much you add in there because it can make it sound really crap really quickly. Then we've got some delay chains in here. The slapback delay, for some reason, it's fallen off. I don't know what's happened to the project. But that's essentially what I'm doing in each one of the leads. Now, they all have the same sort of processing, but slightly tweaked with some different settings and compression rates, depending on how much I want them to be tamed. Now, the trick about this is I've actually found that the vocals were not coming through on the track correctly. That's the best word that I can use. I just found that they were getting drowned out by the instrumental. Really, that's what it came down to. So one of the tricks that you can do is I bust the entire instrumental track into one bus channel and then the vocal into another bus channel. And what I ended up doing here is in the instrumental track, I've got a multiband compressor and I'm using a side chain to the vocal bus, basically allowing the instrumental to duck out of the way every time the vocal actually hits. I found that this was a great way to be able to allow that vocal to get some breathing room to come through and sound nice and clear. Now you have to do this to taste, and some parts, like for example the break, you may not need to do it, but on the drop you may need to do it because it's a lot busier. So I'll let you hear it with and without. And I think if we add the automation lanes, you will see, yes, you can actually see here that it's only applying the sidechain compression to the vocal on the drop, but in the break it's not. So I'll let you maybe hear it from here just into the break, and let me see what the vocals are. Yep, okay, so we'll let you hear it from here, and then what we'll do is we'll cut across to this part so you can hear it with the instrumental as it cuts in. So So in that part, because there's no, it is quite busy, but there's not a lot of competition with the vocals there, I'm not applying it. However, in this part here where we actually have some vocals coming through with the kick and the bass and all the other bits and pieces, we are applying it. So I'll let you hear what that sounds like. Maybe just go back a little bit here and let's play it from here. You can see that's working quite hard then, just to duck the vocals out of the way. And by doing that, you just allow your vocals to have a little bit more space. Now, one of the things I did to actually preserve some CPU was actually routing this to the return channels as well, which I've done below. As you can see here, we've got it's going to the reverb chain. We're going this D to a little bit of saturation in here as well. So that's a really good way to actually make sure that you're conserving some CPU space. So yeah, guys, that's the quick breakdown of my track Calling. What I'll do is I'll include the patches for the lead, for that kind of metallic lead, for my patrons. So if you're interested in doing that, just join the Patreon program. You will have to join for the $10 because I'm kind of sick of people joining up for £3 a month, grabbing everything and then pissing off. So you will have to make a commitment for at least £10. But if you are interested, you'll get a whole lot of goodies, which I kind of tend to update every couple of weeks anyway. So if you've enjoyed these, give it a thumbs up. And until next time, this is Shay Jose signing out.